A girl walks to the edge of her camp as the sky turns gray. She is 14, maybe 15. For the first time in her life, her body has started to bleed, and no one around her is panicking because everyone already knows exactly what it means and exactly what happens next. She is not afraid. You have been taught that a period arrives once a month, 12, maybe 13 times a year for decades. You have been taught that this monthly rhythm is simply what a female body does. The baseline, the default, the very definition of being biologically a woman. But for almost the entire span of human existence, that was not true. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the monthly period, the thing treated as the definition of female biology, may actually be one of the most modern things about the human body. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors lived without calendars, without doctors, without a single written word about how their bodies worked. And in all of that time, menstruation was not a monthly event. It was rare. Not rare like unusual. Rare like a handful of times a year in the gaps between something much larger. That claim sounds impossible. So let's look at exactly where it comes from. In the 1980s, a biological anthropologist named Beverly Strassman, a scientist who studies how evolution shaped human reproduction, went to live among the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa. The Dogon farm, the land used no birth control and followed traditions that have changed little in centuries. Strassman stayed for 2.5 years, and she did something almost no researcher had ever done. She recorded night after night exactly which women were menstruating, tracking a census across 736 consecutive nights. This was not a survey or a guess. It was one of the most careful measurements of natural human menstruation ever made. What she found rewrites the assumption you grew up with. A Dogon woman between the ages of 20 and 34 had on average only about 4 periods across 2 entire years. Read that again. Not 4 periods a month, 4 in 2 years. Why so few? Because for most of her adult life, she was either pregnant or breastfeeding. And during pregnancy, menstruation stops completely. During intense, constant nursing, it usually stops too. So the monthly cycle you think of as normal simply never got the chance to run. But that's not the strange part. When Strassman added everything up across a full lifetime, the number was staggering. A woman living this way menstruates roughly 110 times in her entire life. A woman in a modern industrial society menstruates as many as 400 times, nearly 4 times more. 400 versus 110. That is the gap between the world your body was designed for and the world you actually live in. So let's reconstruct what this really meant day to day in the deep past. Picture your ancestor at 17. In hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists like Richard Lee, who lived among the Jus/Hwansi foragers of the Kalahari, a girl often did not have her first period until around 16. That is years later than girls today, whose bodies now frequently start as early as 11 or 12. The reason is energy. A first period requires a certain reserve of body fat and steady calories, and a lean, active foraging body simply reaches that threshold later. So already before anything else, your ancestor spent far less of her life menstruating because she started so much later. Then, not long after, she has her first child. And here the pattern locks into place. She nurses that child intensely on demand, day and night for years, often while already carrying the next pregnancy. Her body moves through a near continuous rhythm of pregnancy, nursing with almost no room left for monthly bleeding at all. For her, a period was not a routine. It was the exception, a brief occasional signal that surfaced only in the narrow gaps between children. The thing you experience as a monthly certainty was for almost every woman who ever lived one of the rarest states her body ever entered. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because if menstruation was so rare, why did nearly every ancient culture build such powerful rules around it? Across the world, in societies that never met each other on different continents in different centuries, the same structure appears again and again. Special huts, separate spaces, women set apart during the days they bled. For a long time, outsiders read this only one way, as shame. As women being hidden, silence treated as unclean. But Strassman's data from the Dogon suggests something far stranger and far more calculated. Among the Dogon, a menstruating woman goes to a specific hut at the edge of the village in full view, of the entire community. Everyone can see who is there, and that visibility, Strassman argues, is the whole point. Think about the world she lived in. No pregnancy tests, no way to prove from the outside whether a woman was carrying a child or not. In that world, a woman appearing at the menstrual hut was broadcasting one single unfakeable piece of information. She was not pregnant. The hut was not hiding her. It was announcing her reproductive status to every person in the village. Strassman gathered the field evidence for this over 29 months, and the conclusion was cold and precise. In a society deeply concerned with knowing whose child belonged to whom, the menstrual hut worked as an honest signal, a public display that let husbands and families track paternity. What looked like superstition was underneath a system for managing certainty in a world that had almost none. And then there's the myth you have almost certainly heard, that women who live together, who spend their days side by side, eventually bleed together, their cycles falling into sync. It feels ancient. It feels like exactly the kind of thing your tribal ancestors must have experienced around the same fire, moving as one body. In 1971, a researcher named Martha McClintock published a study in the journal Nature that seemed to prove it based on women sharing a college dormitory. The idea spread across the entire world and became something everyone simply knew to be true. But here is the twist. When scientists spent the next 50 years trying to reproduce that result, the effect kept vanishing. Larger studies, better statistics, careful controls. Again and again, no reliable synchrony appeared. What people had been seeing was mostly mathematical coincidence. Two cycles of slightly different lengths will always drift in and out of overlap by pure chance. And human memory clings to the months that matched while quietly forgetting the months that didn't. The synchronized tribe of women bleeding as one was never real. It was a story people told themselves about a past that never happened. So why does any of this matter to you right now today? Here is the payoff. The promise made at the very start. If your ancestors menstruated around 110 times in a life, and a woman today menstruates up to 400 times, then the monthly period you were taught to treat as the baseline of female biology is not the baseline at all. It is a recent invention, the product of a very particular modern world, one with reliable food, early puberty, far fewer pregnancies, and little or no extended breastfeeding. The human body was shaped across hundreds of thousands of years by the exact opposite conditions, and researchers, including Strassman, have pointed to a real cost buried inside that mismatch. A lifetime of nearly continuous cycling means the body is exposed over and over to the full hormonal surges of each cycle far more often than it ever was in the past. And studies have linked that heavier lifetime exposure to higher rates of certain reproductive cancers. The monthly period may be normal only for you and only for now. So the next time a period is described as clockwork, as the steady monthly proof of a healthy female body, remember what that clock is really measuring. Not an ancient rhythm the species has always known, but a brand new one. Invented in the last few thousand years, accelerated in the last 100, and unlike almost anything the women who came before ever lived through. Their bodies and modern bodies are nearly identical, built from the same genes, shaped by the same deep past. The only real difference is the world each was born into. One world made menstruation rare, the other made it monthly, and nobody ever stopped to notice which one was the strange one. Somewhere in the deep past, a girl walked to the edge of her camp as the sky turned gray, bleeding for the first time, and no one panicked. Because they understood something the modern world is only now rediscovering, that this for her would be one of the rarest things her body would ever do.